Hi, I'm Max Keiser. Oligarchy? What's that? Bernie Sanders knows. Stacy.
I want to call your attention to this headline from last week. And this is a headline that could almost be ripped from a conspiracy theory site, but in fact, it's from The Guardian, and it's Bernie Sanders saying it. Bernie Sanders warns of international oligarchy after Paradise Papers leak. Bernie Sanders has warned that the world is rapidly becoming an international oligarchy controlled by a tiny number of billionaires, highlighted by the revelations in the Paradise Papers. That was the first thing I thought when I saw about these Paradise Papers leaked, because all of it is technically legal, all of this sheltering the money offshore. You know, you could do those Venn diagrams of not even that, just like connect the dots, sort of Rachel Maddow-esque sort of thing, that they're all linked together, whether it's Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump or every single head of state and every single head of major corporations in that state or domiciled in that state. They're all connected through the banking system that is like a separate banking system, unique just for them.
Yeah, the Social Justice Network did a study just recently, and they concluded that there's between 20 and 30 trillion dollars that is held offshore. That's part of a parallel economy. That's 1.5 times the GDP of America. They concluded it's about 200,000 people. They pay no tax. They invest in assets that keep going higher in value because the central banks print money in a way that makes the assets that they own go up in price, but no wages. No wages don't go up. That's financial engineering, deregulation, post-Reagan Thatcher. So it's like you have a huge field, you're irrigating that field, and the water that's supposed to irrigate the crops, that it just is diverted only to the folks that are in that 20 to 30 trillion dollar offshore parallel financial universe. So wage growth is not there. Job growth has been transformed to part-time jobs essentially. And the taxes are borne to pay for society by those people that are not on part of that illegal apartheid state. You know, I've said before, it's apartheid, unless you're committing fraud. Now they say it's not, it's legal, but the folks who, it used to be illegal, but they've changed the law to make it legal. If it's legal, because, it gets back to what Bastiat said about looting. If you let looters control the top, they'll have looting throughout the economy. John Locke said in 1710, if the social contract is, you don't need to get undressed. I mean, I know that I'm whinging on here. But I mean, you can just give me a simple cue. You don't need to whip them out, as it were, and to try to distract me. I mean, a simple cut, sign would suffice. I mean, we don't need to go down that path.
I had it too tight, but you mentioned.
Don't Weinstein me.
You mentioned the Tax Justice Network, because they're in this next headline about these Paradise Papers. And again, these sort of leaks keep on coming, and there were the HSBC leaks, and then the Luxembourg leaks, the Lux leaks, and then there was the Panama Papers leaks, and everybody shouts, but nothing happens. None of the laws change. Everything still stays the same. They have their alternative, banking system and financial system and tax system. They also want, in these trade deals, to get their own justice system, the investor-state dispute settlements. So they would be removed from any of our ordinary justice, which, remember, the system we live in is very harsh and very severe. Justice is harsh, taxes are harsh, Obamacare is harsh, education costs are harsh. Their system is like so smooth, no barriers, no ease of movement, no taxes, no justice for
deferred prosecutions, unicorns and lollipops, free money from the Fed, asset prices up perpetuity. It's a beautiful world they live in.
That's what the world they live in. And then, but we're stuck in these like bordered sort of countries with high taxes. Yeah, ghettos. You can see whatever nation you live in, you're essentially stuck in a ghetto. And yet our media will like set up these paradigms of like, here's the right, here's the left, choose one of the teams. And, you know, your news media will hail things like Tim Cook and Steve Jobs and Apple as these great, wonderful people, and they should protect us from, protect our democracy from evil voices and keep evil voices out and things like that. So I want to turn to one of what the Paradise Papers showed about what Apple did in terms of setting up one of their divisions, one of their tax loopholes, one of their offshore havens through Jersey. And this is from John Christensen, and the director of the Tax Justice Network. And he tweeted, "Bad Appleby. Apple chose Jersey. These are the key criteria guiding the choice. What does this say about Jersey, but what does it also say about Apple?" Because remember, the news here says Apple should be one of the corporations that protect us from, you know, any fake news or things like that. So they wanted it in writing, for example. There were a few things that they wanted, like in writing, that they are guaranteed like this, like no taxes. But the number 4 point is quite remarkable because, again, they're being asked, all these tech giants are being asked to protect our democracy. Here's what Apple wanted, guaranteed from Jersey. Is there a credible opposition party or movement that may replace the current government? So they were afraid of a credible opposition party. They wanted to make sure there were none there in order to, before they would set up their cash there, before they would put, I was going to say launder or hide, but again, as legal, all this stuff is legal for them. You try to go there and set it up yourself, you'll be like arrested and thrown in Guantanamo, but there you have it.
That would fall into the category of election interference, either overtly or covertly. Here you have Tim Cook, CEO of Apple, engaging in the United Kingdom in election interference. The biggest company in the world, soon to be $1 trillion company, strong-arming Theresa May, like she got Weinstein by Tim Cook. Tim Cook's Weinstein to Theresa May, saying, we don't want, as long as you can control your government, that says there's no opposition, we don't want to ever pay taxes. We want to use the Jersey Islands like a Weinstein pimp, okay? Okay, Theresa May? And Theresa May like, come on, baby, come on over to the UK, come on over to Jersey, woo, 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 woo. It's so disgusting, the duplicity from that media, where they come out and they, I'm sorry, I'd hate to bring reality into the mix.
Jersey has their own, they're sovereign, so they have their own.
Yeah, right. And I staple on a vagina and I'm a woman.
Okay. Well, so let's go on to the next headline again. So here again is another story about, you know, this two-tier sort of system that they have, and yet the people stuck in the ghettoed borders, the bordered ghettos, you know, we keep on fighting for like the Tim Cooks of the world that say the right thing. They sound all cool and groovy and with and progressive. So here's another headline about how, you know, those pharmaceutical giants who help us. They do so much work for us. They invent all these great drugs and pharmaceuticals that will save us and cure us, and they make all these cute commercials about all the help they provide for little children and protect your family.
With the, they have a list of the symptoms, what do they call them, the side effects. Read that, it's like every single minute there's a new drug ad for some phantom disease like shaky leg syndrome that they make up. Then they get a grant from some, corrupt congressman in America, billions of dollars, and the side effect is always may induce suicide, may induce suicide, may induce suicide. Yeah. Well, the American flag is inducing suicide because you look at that and you say, oh, it's a pharmacocracy. It's a pharmacocracy.
Okay, well, let's look. But one of the ways they manage to get away with such high cost of drugs is that they say they need to research and develop new drugs. So before we rant about that, let's look at the headline. The headline is, most new drug patents are for old remedies, research shows. The U.S. patent system was designed to protect new innovations, but drug makers are more often than not using it to protect old ones. At least 74% of drugs associated with new patents were medicines already on the market, according to research by Robin Feldman, director of the Institute for Innovation Law at the University of California Hastings College of Law. The percentage reached 80% in 3 of the years studied, in 2005 to 2015. So it's known as evergreening. So they make a slight change or in the manufacturing process of the same sort of aspirin, say, and they say, well, we need to extend our patent by another 14 years.
Yeah.
So basically, they're saying that 74% of them are just evergreening. It's
Right,
not, there's no new innovation.
Patents and trademarks, it's limited monopoly time for a limited time. They abuse the system to create perpetual patents, perpetual copyrights. It's a complete subversion of the Constitution, which says explicitly, Article 17, authored by Thomas Jefferson, that the original copyright, for example, is 14 years, 7 plus 7 years. Patents, similarly, for a limited time, you get a monopoly protection. When you extend it out to infinite amount of time, you're effectively giving your country, America, a lobotomy. And that's what these pharmaceutical companies are good at. They're reaching into our craniums and they're ripping our brains out and stepping on them with a big black boot. And they call that capitalism. But guess what? It's not. It's, you know, it's not.
And of course, you know, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State then, they were going around the world and they were trying to basically get these trade deals. They were calling them trade deals, TPP and TTIP. And those were really for pharmaceutical companies to basically extend these patent and copyright protections around the world. But remember, we covered this at the time, all these pharmaceutical giants were trying to do tax inversion. So here they were benefiting from this particular ghetto in the US where we have very high pharmaceutical and medical costs. And they were trying to get the protection of this country to maintain these high medical costs, pharmaceutical costs, and yet didn't want to pay taxes to this system where it's bankrupting. Still, hundreds of thousands of Americans go bankrupt every year because of medical costs. And here they, you know, the same system, it's this financial oligarchy, this international oligarchy, as Bernie Sanders calls it. This is the same class, and it's happening. It happens right in front of our face all day long in our headlines.
Vivisectionists, eugenicists, and Tim Cook. And that's who runs America's Fortune 500.
And Pfizer.
Pfizer, lobotomists.
But as it says, this study definitively shows that stifling competition is not limited to a few pharma bad apples. Rather, it is a common and pervasive problem, endemic to the pharmaceutical industry, endemic
to the
international oligarchy.
Their business model. Their business model. Well, we got to go to the break. And, you know, if it gets really bad, don't bother us. Stay right there. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to Max Blumenthal, senior editor of Alternates, Gray Zone Project, co-host of Moderate Rebels with Ben Norton. Welcome, Max Blumenthal.
Good to be with you.
All right, now, you know, there's a few journalists in America that I really pay close attention to. Matt Taibbi was one. You're another one. I mean, you're really on the front line of investigative journalism in this country. It's a craft that is diminished with the rise of, you know, shouty journalism, of which I'm part. But you're actually doing stuff and investigating and bringing, you know, shedding light on in a moment of darkness in this country's history, journalistically, in my view. Let me pick your brain a little bit here. In 2016, Les Moonves of CBS said that Trump may not be good for the country, but he sure was good for business. Can we say this about Russiagate a little bit? When I watch Rachel Maddow, she seems to be cashing in on the Russiagate thing, like you know what we used to say. Alex Jones was taking things to a level of ratings milking. Is this happening on the left now, Max?
Yeah, I mean, it all started in the 2016 campaign, and I was watching CNN, and I started noticing they were having basically like infomercials for Melania, businesswoman, entrepreneur, model. You know, they were pumping up Trump on CNN so much, and it was Jeff Zucker who understood the appeal of Trump to the American public. This is the former producer of Trump's Apprentice, which introduced Trump to a national audience. Now he was the CEO of CNN, and he was going to pump Trump up. And then as soon as Trump gets elected, CNN decides we're going to tear him down and appeal to this resistance crowd, which represents everything to the left of the far right Trump, including, you know, neoconservatives, never Trump Republicans. They had a big audience. Jake Tapper, who does the primetime show for CNN, his ratings are up 53% because he's pushing that resistance model of just anything anti-Trump while promoting war. And Rachel Maddow is a really fascinating character. I mean, this is someone who I personally almost have a seizure every time I watch her. It's just very difficult aesthetically. The audio, it's really hard for me to tolerate watching her. But a lot of people, I think from an older demographic, baby boomers, they really enjoy her right now. But if you actually look at her numbers prior to the election compared to now, it's one of the most dramatic shifts we've seen in the history of cable news. She's now the #1 cable news host. Prior to the election, her ratings were in the toilet. She was talking about actual Republican antics, actual right-wing media, the Koch brothers, Robert Mercer, the actual people who influence right-wing politics in the U.S. Now, according to a content study performed by Aaron Mate, a journalist for The Intercept, the majority of Rachel Maddow's content focuses on Russiagate. And
Well,
that
what's crazy
has
about
been
it, Max, is that the narrative is like it's winnowing down. It gets because there's no evidence, there's no smoking gun, there's no proof, and they're just seeking every little tidbit that comes across. Somehow, it's Russiagate. It's become farcical.
Yeah.
And but as you point out, the ratings are going higher, and they are. It seems like there's Glenn Beck, introduced the idea of crying on television, and then, to imitate Alex Jones. And these were considered to be outside of the mainstream by a big factor. And yet now, this is what the way that Rachel Maddow is now kind of bringing in these stylistics, but at the same time criticizing people like Alex Jones. But there's just no there, right? I mean, what's the status now of this Russiagate story? It seems like there's nothing there. What's currently going on?
Yeah, I mean, what we've seen in the past few days is the Paradise Papers were leaked, and this should be an explosive expose of international capital and corruption. Tax shelters should be really the heart of this investigation, but instead we've seen very little about that. Why? Because the International Consortium of Investigative Journalism, which also did the Panama Papers, has refused to release these documents to the public, and instead they're leaking them out to mainstream publications like the New York Times, then it's filtering out through MSNBC and CNN, and they're focusing almost with laser-light precision on anything Russia-related. And what we've seen, I have no sympathy for any of these international oligarchs, but what we've seen is pure, unadulterated McCarthyism, focusing on figures like Yuri Milner, who is an apolitical Silicon Valley oligarch who happens to be a Russian Jewish oligarch. And what The Guardian did was paint connections between Yuri Milner and Jared Kushner and a company that Jared Kushner had invested in as some kind of nefarious evidence of collusion, when in fact Yuri Milner has close ties to the Clinton family. He did a panel at Davos with Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google, and Chelsea Clinton. He has given an award to Morgan Freeman, who's become one of the kind of spokesmen for Russiagate through a neocon front group. I mean, Yuri Milner is a friend of Mark Zuckerberg. So he's pretty much, what we're talking about is oligarchs doing business with each other, and it's framed in terms of anyone who does business with anyone who is a Russian national being scandalous. That's McCarthyism. I mean, even in the McCarthy era, people were drummed up, at least for communist suspicions, not on the basis of simply coming from a country that we don't like. And so this is what we're seeing in the past few days. But if you look at any of the things that Rachel Maddow or any of these figures have been covering, for example, that Russia attempted to hack voting systems in 21 states, when these stories fall apart, and when the Secretary of States of California, Texas, and Wisconsin say, no, the Russians actually didn't try to hack our voting systems, there's never any follow-up. And so people are left with the impression that these stories are true, even when one after another, they fall apart.
Well, let's talk about some of the risks this type of approach takes, because I was watching these cable stations this week, and I was tuning in. I'm like, I want to find out what's happening in Saudi Arabia. There's like a coup going on there.
Yeah.
People are getting killed. Their helicopters are crashing. There's, there's a big story here, and none of them covered it.
Yeah.
So the risk is not only journalism, but they're not covering stuff that's actually important. Your thoughts on this?
Yeah, that's a great point. I was actually watching MSNBC last night, not through any fault of my own, but I just happened to be in a place where it was on. And there was no coverage of Saudi Arabia, where a purge is taking place where Mohammed bin Salman has taken the heads of all of the media agencies that are responsible for all of the media in the Arab world except for Al Jazeera and put them in a de facto internment camp at the Ritz-Carlton in Riyadh. This should be a huge story. Beyond that, Donald Trump has sold them something like $150 billion of weapons. His foreign policy is essentially controlled by Saudi Arabia and the UAE with respect to the Middle East. We're looking at the possibility of region-wide destabilization because of these moves. And MSNBC, I mean, for 2 hours, they didn't touch it. They only talked about Trump's visit to North Korea and his incendiary rhetoric. And this is the real source of foreign influence. I mean, we just had a week of congressional hearings about Russian Facebook ads, which include, cute images of puppies, and a LGBT-themed Buff Bernie coloring book was also featured in one of these ads. And, you had these hysterical hearings. But when are we going to talk about the real source of foreign influence in Washington, and that emanates from Saudi Arabia and the pro-Israel lobby primarily? It's never covered on cable news, or very seldom.
Quickly, I don't know if you've watched like Democracy Now!, but it seems like Amy Goodman in Democracy Now!, watched for years, has also kind of fallen under the sway of this Rachel Maddow Russiagate hoax hysteria.
Yeah.
Is that a fair assessment? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah. You've definitely seen a depreciation in the quality of Democracy Now!, not only reporting various Russiagate rumors, prioritizing these stories in their news that they introduced the show with, but also bringing in guests like Kurt Eichenwald, who is the discredited Newsweek reporter who has had to delete several of his articles as a result of a libel lawsuit, which discredited his reporting on some of the pieces that went viral during the campaign.
What's the calculation that goes on in the mind? I mean, Amy Goodman, she's running the show there. There's no question about it. Does she feel that by compromising her journalistic standards, she's somehow helping to undermine Trump because she feels it's her duty as a citizen above her responsibility as a journalist, that this man must be impeached, and she's going to completely change the character of her show in this effort? I mean, why would she make that calculation? It's so blatantly unprofessional.
Yeah. I mean, I've known her for years. I used to be, I would say, at least an occasional guest, if not a frequent guest. I'm not welcome back on for whatever reason. And many of my colleagues who, focused on issues like Palestine, we're not going on there anymore. What we've seen is sort of a...
But she's been critical of the IDF for years.
Yeah,
she's been the cutting edge of all the reporting on Israel-Palestine issues. There's Amy Goodman. She's in Palestine. She's talking to people about... These people are getting occupied. They're getting murdered. And there she is, right? Now this has all been washed away. It's just everything. Israel is a big fat kiss from Amy Goodman now.
Well, it's not a big fat kiss. It's just a shrug of the shoulders. I think she's covered it like twice in the past year. A lot of the issues that Democracy Now! Is known for falling by the wayside, and she's really enacting kind of a pale imitation of MSNBC. I assume her ratings are up. She's becoming more popular with the resistance crowd, and she likes it. But we're witnessing just across the board a gigantic liberal cultural meltdown in the Trump era, and the quality of everything connected to liberalism has just evaporated.
How does the left actually lose popularity in the Trump era? The recent polls, they're actually losing popularity.
Yeah.
How is that possible? What's wrong with these people?
Yeah, the Democratic Party's at a 25-year low, according to a recent poll. I think it's a CNN poll. It's gone down 7 points since March alone, as it's been cranking up the Russiagate conspiracies. The numbers are lowest among non-whites and among youth. And it has to do with the fact that it's elevated candidates like Hillary Clinton through rigged primaries over the most popular candidate in the U.S. And the party refuses to offer a critique of the forces in the system that are driving people's lives into literal ruin. So I think there's just a lack of resonance there with the Democratic Party. There's a major disconnect. And they've kind of crafted all of their messaging towards a really narrow contingent of coastal elites that most people don't relate to.
Right. We just finished a trip. We went all across the country, 16 different states. And the Russiagate hoax is completely absent from any discussion, outside of kind of the coast, the New York and LA coast. And people are they're not focused on it because they don't see how that really affects their lives. There's never been any proof, there's never been any evidence of it. There's nothing going on to suggest that this is something they need to focus on. And yet, what's the disconnect between the people running the party who presumably want power and their inability to understand that they're losing power? Like, do they turn the charts upside down? Are they just look at it like, oh, we're losing, now we're winning? Are they just brain dead? What's going on here?
Yeah, I think you're looking at a small group of people who are swamp creatures, who are living in a very insular bubble, whether it's liberal Hollywood, whether it's Washington, the Beltway culture, whether it's Midtown Manhattan, whatever it is. They're out of touch with the kind of pain that most people are feeling, along with the moral injury of people who have family members who are veterans who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. They're not talking about war and peace and these issues. And what they really, I think they thought after Trump was elected was that, number one, he had actually won through a secret Russian intelligence operation, and therefore he was not a legitimate president, and therefore they could impeach him through some kind of Watergate-style investigation, and meanwhile, they'd all get good ratings and everyone would read their articles about these collusion stories,
right.
And it hasn't worked.
We got to cut it there. You stay on for another segment?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Max Blumenthal. If you want to catch us on Twitter, it's Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.